Did Nancy know she was going to be in this book?
There are always people that you have to warn ahead of time. You know what I mean? So, don't know any writers if you don't want to, wind up
Show
in
up
a
in
book.
their fiction, yeah.
Yeah. So I kept thinking as I was writing, she's like, I have to tell, I'm going to have to tell Nancy this. And so I finally get books in hand, and I thought, almost like she would have just known, right? But she didn't. So I called her a couple of weeks ago. I said, Nancy, you got a book coming. You're in it. And she was like, oh, great. Glad to hear it.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
You know, it's like when you stop the recording and then you start it again, but it's like zoomed in to a fraction of a second, and then it looks like some kind of medical device.
Yeah, my home computer is always doing that. It's like, what in the world makes you think that that's what I want? This is not helpful.
Why is that even a possibility?
Yeah, I don't need that.
Little pull back the curtain,
behind
Deus
the
Ex Machina here at Northwards. You remember Ethan? Ethan Shanty is with us. He produces the show and sits in the studio and records us having these conversations before every episode of Northwards.
And generally looks pretty grumpy and unapproachable.
That's right, exactly. Do you remember, a couple months ago we talked with author Tracy Lang, who set her book in Potsdam, New York.
Yeah, what was the book? What happened to the
McRae's?
That's
you still have my copy of it someplace?
I do. I've definitely read it. I wanted to, but listen, I brought it home and I was like,
there's so many pages.
Well, it's not the page count that bothered me. It's the fact that I have about a stack of 13 books that are in progress sitting on top of my bookshelf. Mm-hmm. So what happened to the McRae's is on that pile. And
that is what happened to the McRae's. They wound up underneath 12 other titles.
God rest their souls. Anyway, why?
So, we had this conversation about what it was like to read a book that is set in the place that both of us live.
Where we live, yeah.
And I think the remarkable thing about it, and you and I talked about this, and then Tracy Lang and I talked about this, is how true to life that setting was, especially considering that she had no real prior connection to Potsdam.
Right, yeah. She came and she visited and she did a bunch of research about it, but otherwise it's not like she'd lived here for years, but still managed to capture the feel and the vibe of the place.
She just got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I bring this up because the writer we're going to talk with today, Christopher Shaw, lives in Vermont. Lived for many years in the Tri-Lakes area. Okay. And so it's less of a surprise that he kind of got the place that he set his most recent book, which mainly is set in Lake Placid and the surrounding area in the Adirondacks, places like Keene. In fact, the book opens on the road going past Casa del Sol, which is a restaurant that even if you've never been there, you know it because it's a landmark in
I know it.
Saranac Lake. In fact, I remember actually, so here's a Casa del Sol story I have for you. The only Casa del Sol story, in fact, I have. So I worked here at North Country Public Radio for 2 years in the 90s, during which Casa del Sol already existed. Okay. And I knew NCPR was a big deal when my then girlfriend, who I've now been married to for 25 years, which tells you how long ago this took place, we went out to dinner one night at Casa del Sol, and we were having a conversation at our table, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, are you Mitch Teich?"
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Having recognized my voice, which...
Oh, right, because they wouldn't have seen your picture, because it's not like that was all over the internet at the time.
No.
Wow. I've also been recognized by my voice. It is a very strange experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's usually followed by, you don't look anything like I thought you would look like, which I don't know if that's a compliment or...
It's funny because we both look kind of similar.
We do look pretty similar.
And that's why when people ask me if I'm Mitch Teich, I say, no, I'm Ethan Shanty.
Does that work for you?
Not really.
Oh, okay.
I expected more tattoos.
Aaron's my girlfriend's coworkers are they're always like, "Oh, that Ethan? Well, what's he like? And it's just like, what are you talking? He's just a guy.
He's just a schmo.
just a schmuck.
Well, actually, interestingly, I was just having a conversation with my daughter who goes to a little liberal arts college in Vermont, and actually the very liberal arts college where our writer today, Chris Shaw, used to teach.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, small world.
And she was asking, because she's sort of graduating in a few weeks, and she was asking when we were going to get there because a friend of hers wanted me to be the guest on her radio show.
Oh, really?
Because apparently when you're related to somebody in public radio and you go to a little liberal arts college in Vermont, everybody thinks that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's
like going to college at a coffee shop.
Well, there's no getting around the fact that, like, we are kind of minor celebrities.
Minor celebrities.
Minor celebrities. We work in mines, the public radio mines.
And we're under 18. We're like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone.
Yeah. We have to get legally separated from our parents in order to do this job.
What were we talking about? So anyway, so Casa del Sol in 1996, when this happened, probably the fall of 96, maybe the spring of 97, was definitely, it felt like not only had I been recognized, but I've been recognized in a place that was like the place to see and be seen.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I thought that was pretty cool, and it was still early enough in my relationship with my wife that she wasn't already rolling her eyes every time that happened.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it's like for Aaron too. Because like when we started dating 12 years ago, I was working at another radio station, and a lot of people knew me from there. And then moved on to this radio station, and a lot of people know me from here. And I think she's just sick of it.
Wait, you're dating Bert Sienna from Radio Crayola?
Well, if people do, I don't want to talk about this. Makes me feel so weird. I don't want to talk about our own celebrity.
It's a very strange brand of celebrity when you're in public radio, though.
Yeah.
Because the places that you can guarantee, wow, this is sounding like a major ego trip, except when I say this, the places that you'll be recognized are A, coffee shops, B, bookstores, C, natural foods co-ops.
Yeah, or liberal arts colleges.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Where is I'm trying to think about the strangest place I've been recognized.
A humidor.
Yeah, it definitely has happened in humidors. Walk-in closets. I got nothing.
Drive-through lane at Arby's? I don't know. Hey, do you have the meats? Hey, are you Ethan Shanty?
Oh, we've got the meats. What are we talking about? We're talking about Chris
Shaw, yeah. So,
wrote a book.
So anyway, his book is set in the Adirondacks. It opens in 1982.
Wait, I know what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Stop. Yeah. We talked about when we talked about God of the Woods, another book. We talked about what happened to the McRaes. Now we're talking about this book,
which is called The Manager.
All of which are set in like upstate New York communities. And I realized in one of those previous conversations that there is kind of like a fascination in literature with upstate New York right now, or even in television. Like do you watch Dexter? You watch that show? The serial killer who kills.
Dexter, but, yeah.
So the last season was set in a fictional upstate New York town that was basically supposed to be Saranac Lake or Tupper Lake, and for whatever reason, this community this part of the world is in the zeitgeist. Right? I don't get it. I like living here, but what's the obsession with it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know that it's an obsession, but
a preoccupation.
Yeah, maybe a preoccupation. Exactly. It's an interesting place, and it's a place that not everybody knows a lot about. And so, for a long time, like it seemed like every book was set on the coast of Maine.
Sure.
Or you've had your noir fiction set in 1930s Los Angeles or whatever.
Sure. Well, maybe it's because like a lot of this land is still untouched and feels like mysterious.
Yeah.
It feels like there are still things to find here. Maybe it's that.
At any rate, the book that we're talking about today is set in a place that was very familiar to Chris Shaw, but for anyone who's younger than a certain point, it might feel only sort of vaguely familiar. Like you kind of appreciate the setting and in some ways, though, it's a glimpse back at this place that we inhabit 40 or 45 years ago. And it, like I said, it opens in 1982 in the wake of the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid. Yeah. It's a quirky spy novel that's very Cold War oriented. As I said, it opens in front of the Casa del Sol, where this mysterious hitchhiker gets picked up, and we'll talk more about it in the interview itself. And a lot of the book mines Chris Shaw's earlier life as a magazine editor in the Adirondacks, but it also mines our kind of collective memory about, what the dynamic was during the Cold War when things were a little bit easier to understand. We were the good guys in quotation marks, and the Soviets were the bad guys in quotation marks. But things actually were maybe a little bit more complicated than that, as the book kind of lays out for us. It's a really interesting read. It's funny in places. It's really kind of nice to sort of visit this place that we're living in, but at a time that seems in some ways like the distant past, but really wasn't all that long ago. So I traveled to Middlebury College, where I met up with Chris Shaw in one of the Media Lab recording studios. Chris Shaw, thank you so much. Thanks for making time.
And likewise, Mitch, thank you so much for doing this. I'm very grateful.
I feel like, so we're doing this interview in the basement of Axon Hall at Middlebury College, just downstairs from where your office was for many years. Is that right?
Yes. I don't know how many years I was in this office, but it was probably 15 or 16. And I was here often. I had other offices for 4 or 5 years before that.
As I was reading the book and driving over here this morning and thinking about where we were meeting, it dawned on me the right place to have done this interview probably would have been Casa del Sol in Saranac Lake.
That would have been a good place.
That is where the book opens.
Yes, it is.
The thing that really hit me as I was reading this, in a strange way, it made me nostalgic for the Cold War.
That is strange, Mitch. I kind of understand. What was I trying to do? I had this notion that if I set it back a few years from when, I was actually an editor in Lake Placid, it would harmonize more with the politics of the time. So pre-Gorbachev in the Soviet Union, I thought it would make it a little closer to the Miracle on Ice hockey game, which is still in people's memory in 1982 when the book opens. The opening in front of the Casa del Sol, where Walter Loving picks up a mysterious hitchhiker, actually took place. It's one of the few things that actually happened autobiographically in this book. It was probably more like 88, 89.
You picked up a hitchhiker. I'm not surprised by that, but a mysterious hitchhiker by the Casa del Sol.
In the snow, wearing a black top coat and a gold Rolex, and no hat and no gloves and no boots. And unexplained what he was doing out there in the snow, in the near dark, 4:30, 5 o'clock in a late February evening. And I drove him in the snowstorm over to Lake Placid. And he had we didn't talk much, he had a Slavic accent. And I dropped him off at the Hilton, and it stuck in my mind, who the hell is that? At the time, so it must have been, I'm thinking, maybe it was 87 before the 88 Calgary Olympics. Because there
probably before the wall fell, too.
I don't remember. When did the wall fall?
89.
Yeah, oh yeah. There were actually lower level games going on preparatory to whatever the next Olympics was. I forget whether it was Sarajevo or Calgary. But I thought, who is this guy? What's he doing in town? What was his accent? I never found out. I never really pursued it. I talked to people, a couple of people about, who traveled with Soviet and East German teams, and it turns out they always had security with them. And it turned out that, I think, which we knew at the time, that athletes did try to defect and escape or ask for asylum when they were traveling abroad, and rarely succeeded. So, I put this thing aside forever. I mostly forgot about it. And every once in a while I thought, well, maybe I'm going to try something with that thing that happened, because who knows what it was. Never took it seriously. I wrote 2 books after I retired. I went to Mexico to spend the winter. I went down there thinking I wouldn't write anything. I would just read to prepare for this other project and some travel I was going to do in the spring. And I said, well, maybe I should try to write that thing about the hitchhiker as a short story. And it just ran with me for 7 weeks and 150 pages. Nothing like that had ever happened. I woke up in the morning, I sat down, I knew what was going to happen next. It just came together on its own. Now, did I throw everything in the way I did with the other novel? Yeah, I just threw everything in and let it run. And then I got home with 150 pages and half a novel, and I was stuck with now a problem, which was, what am I going to do? I mean, I think I have to finish this, which then required another, re-entry into that fantasy zone. When it turned out, I showed it to some people to read. I did a little editing and rewriting. And I got good readings on it. I mean, I was very unsure about it.
It sounds like you're almost an innocent bystander, and it just sort of hit you.
It sort of did, and I was always, very skeptical of it, actually, because I don't do genre, I don't do plot, really. So it was the first thing I ever, plotted story I ever did in my life. I was avoiding, spy genre kind of stuff. So, I had in my mind a little bit Graham Greene, right? Just in the back of my mind, for whom, the espionage flavor is kind of in the background, and his people who are attached to MI5 or the CIA and the Ugly American or whatever are just sort of dorks, who are on the scene and just kind of screwing things up for whoever is trying to keep the peace or do good, right? Or just get by, in the case of The Ugly American or The Heart of the Matter. So that's Walter's problem is, here's this kind of espionage plot from outside somewhere, landing in the middle of his, remote backcountry existence and, screwing up his romantic life and everything else. And he feels compelled to help this one a person who appeals to him for assistance, who turns out to be this spectacular Soviet skater and writer.
I think the thing that kind of makes it really appealing, Walter as a character, he's not an ugly American exactly, but he is kind of clueless about this whole world that he finds himself thrust
Completely.
into. And the thing that maybe amused me the most about the situation that he's in is he's an editor of a regional magazine, another autobiographical element to this for you. And so as he is getting more in the espionage world that he finds himself in, he still has to do all the things that go into running a magazine in Lake Placid, like assigning stories about resorts and restaurants.
And getting calls from
freelancers wondering where their checks are. And
well, not only that, but the director of the local semi-public institution that runs all the ski areas and Olympic venues, who did not like my storytelling or editing. That is actually a little bit of autobiography right there. His name, Ted Farkas, kind of echoes with his model's real name of those days. My only regret with using that bit was that his string of invective and profanity was much better than I could ever reproduce.
Although there's an impressive string of invective and profanity that finds its way into this book.
Yeah, not as good as his.
I guess the other thing about setting this book when you did, and it opens in 1982, but it moves forward into 84 and beyond. And there are a lot of other things that are going on in the world. I mean, Gorbachev becomes the Soviet premier, and the relationship between the superpowers has changed. But as we find out, that doesn't necessarily mean that the characters who were, executing their nation's agendas have changed. Obviously, we don't want to give too many spoilers here, but I sort of found it interesting, like the idea. I mean, it's a spy novel, so we have people who, and I won't say who.
It's not a spy genre novel,
right? No, it's not a spy genre novel, but there are some of the. I hesitate to use the word tropes,
No, tropes is okay. There are a couple. I mean, so this is the problem I was starting to talk about before. Once you introduce a spy. It's either going to be look like just I don't know what, but you're stuck with certain expectations. There are going to be expectations on the reader's part. So I kept wondering, oh God, do I have to do some fancy kind of tech research? No, I'm not doing that.
Well, right. So there are no exploding cufflinks nobody's driving an Aston Martin with a smoke screen that comes out of the back.
It's all very analog.
But there are people playing both sides of the fence.
Totally.
And that.
Well, everybody is.
Well, right, exactly. And so we're clearly not giving anything away, but that kind of interests me because the fences. I think the place of the fence is moving as the book plays out.
Well, that's a better way to put it. That's exactly what happens, as often happens with historical movements, and like we're seeing now. History happens, and mostly people just get run over by it, and they're not prepared. And that's what happens a lot through this narrative. And what I was trying to reflect, one of the things I had in the back of my mind as I was writing, and it's kind of almost too obvious, is how things have changed since those days and what we remember. And that's so when I bring it forward in time toward the very end. We're closer up to, now, and we see how some of those things are playing out. AIDS, environmental questions, especially around activism, and pipeline protests, hydro protests, which are a sort of a sub-theme of the book that runs throughout the whole thing. And I actually incorporated an old novella into part of the novel to make that clearer. A novella I had never published or ever even sent out, but it was always kind of in the background, the origin story of some of these characters.
Well, and it's worth noting that even just in the times between when you finished writing this novel and the time that the novel came out, the fences seem to have changed even more. And maybe that's what got me nostalgic about the Cold War.
Well, I can see that.
I think understanding the U.S.-Soviet relationship circa 1982 is maybe a lot easier to wrap one's head around than understanding the U.S.-Russian relationship circa 2025.
Very true, Mitch. I have many things to say about that, which I will refrain from saying on the air. But
invective and profanity being not the best part of it.
Well, it definitely echoes, and I didn't intend that, but I got to the end and I saw where I was, and the echoes have gotten stronger since I finished the book. So what you say is very true, and it goes along with my lack of intention to ever write this, and the sort of the accidentality of it. And that's also a good thing to trust in terms of the creative process. You don't always have in mind what's coming. There isn't a list of, next projects. I mean, there is, but, it largely gets thrown out because one like this comes along and bites you on the rear end, So and you just have to go with it. And these characters owned me from the very beginning.
They owned you from the very beginning, as opposed to you owning them.
Yeah. I mean, some of them are completely fictional. Some of them have vague relations to living or unliving people, very vague. Mostly, I mean, let's be very specific and say, I never did 99% of the stuff in this book. If you think that I did, then woo. Because, Walter's a little more extreme than I was in those days. But he also goes through, some significant changes as a result of his manifold failures throughout the book that put him and a lot of other people in danger, and he is forced to reckon with.
For you, I mean, was it unusual to have such an obvious starting point? I mean, the idea of picking up a mysterious hitchhiker in the snow, wearing a top coat and a Rolex in front of the Casa del Sol is kind of the ultimate starting point for a novel. It's hard to imagine like a more like straightforward origin point for a story to emanate from. Does that happen to you very often? I mean, not picking up hitchhikers in the snow, but...
Never. And I wouldn't have thought so myself when I started this book. Thank you for saying that. In retrospect, it seems like what you're saying is true. And
it's like a gift, almost.
I'm sorry?
I mean, it's almost like a gift.
Well, it was a total gift. I didn't see it as one until I started to write it. It just appeared. At least those first 150 pages, the arc of it was all right there. And I'd never had that happen before. I've always been very slow, very painstaking. I rewrite too much as I go along. I was just talking to somebody else in the studio here recently about the Dylan movie, which, whatever you think of it, I sang along with every song, even though it's not a perfect film. But there's a scene in which Joan Baez wakes up in Dylan's apartment in the Greenwich Village, and she's saying, well, I write songs too, and little Bobby's there in his underpants and smoking, lighting a cigarette, and he says, "You try too hard." And I just thought, well, that's the secret of Dylan right there. After you have some craft, after you have some skills and a sense of where you're going, then you can just sort of let it flow. And I never had that experience. Part of it is, aging for me. And I was, sort of entering this stage that Edward Said, the literary critic, called late style, where, certain artists, thinkers, other scientists get to a point late in life where their career, if they had one, was behind them, and, the need to produce in a certain way, matters of form, matters of, needing to be even understood or comprehended. So he uses, they fall away late in life, and this other kind of work emerges that sort of needs to find its way out. And it's less concerned with form, it's less concerned with career, it's less concerned with certain of the expectations that come, early in a creative career. I never saw that happening. I never saw it coming. But when I retired in 2018 from teaching, I had a finished novel that I pulled out of a drawer that turned out to be better than I remembered. I found that I had entered that stage of late style, and I found that aging and being beyond any question of making it was very liberating.
All the more amazing that Dylan figured it out so young.
Well, there are many questions about, how that happened. And, I it's a mystery to me to this day where any of those songs came from. I don't want to talk about Dylan and this whole thing, except for the fact that when I drove south this past fall or January, I listened to music much differently than I did when I was actually performing and, hanging around with musicians. Songs get stuck in my head, and I'm not as comfortable with that as I used to be. So I don't listen to albums that much anymore. I don't listen to melodies that much anymore. I listen to mostly like jazz shows and stuff like that. But this time I took, one massive compilation of Dylan bootleg recordings that I'd never heard in my life, from very early until, pretty late in the 70s. And I was just amazed by some of it. Some of the songs I knew, but they were takes I hadn't heard. One of the things I realized was how often he is echoing old songs, echoing and even stealing from Tin Pan Alley, old English ballads, Appalachian tunes, blues, from all over the map, from literature, from poetry. He weaves it, he doesn't weave it in, he just throws it in, right? And then makes use of it in a new kind of way. And, certain people have objected to that, and it's like it's stealing, it's not original. No, he's doing something else with it that's kind of brilliant. And that keeps the work going, right? In other words, even a song like Hour When the Ship Comes In is an amazing poem and song. It echoes the quality of a 19th century shanty or 18th century story ballad. And that's a secret, that the need to be original all the time can be very killing. And Borges himself said that there aren't any new stories, get over it. But look at what he did. He completely, sort of reinvented the Latin American short fiction. And it's something called, magic realism, which Marquez figured out is you just state anything, sort of that seems kind of magical in a completely matter-of-fact way. Those writers were also doing the same thing, or just, as Marquez always said, he was just telling the stories of his grandmother exactly the way she told them, and that was the reality that they lived in.
Well, so then getting things back to Chris Shaw,
Sorry.
I wondered. Oh no, it's fine. So you mentioned the 99% of the stuff that Walter does is not from your own history, and that the people who inhabit this novel are fictitious. There is one exception, and she is a working photographer in the Adirondacks.
Yes.
What is Nancy Battaglia doing in this novel?
Well, she's not the only one. There are a couple of other real people in there, and my son was talking to my grandson the other day when I gave them copies of this book, and he said, "You'll find that your grandfather uses real people along with fiction people." And he was right. So, well, look, I mean, when I was at the magazine, Nancy was about as dependable as you could get, and the New York Times made use of her for many years. She shot the Olympics more than once, and other international sports events around the area and elsewhere, and we see each other every couple of years, and have stayed in touch, and it just seemed natural when Walter winds up in Sarajevo later in the book, doing a small job for the New York Times, a freelance job. It's a job he gets through Nancy Battaglia's connections there. Her last name is only mentioned by the character who's actually the manager, the Soviet agent. Igor Chernyenko.
Did Nancy know she was going to be in this book?
So here's a problem with doing this. There are always people that you have to warn ahead of time. You know what I mean? So, don't know any writers if you don't want to, wind up
Show
in
up
a
in their
book.
fiction, yeah.
Yeah. So I kept thinking as I was writing. She's like, I have to, I'm going to have to tell Nancy this. And so I finally get books in hand, and I thought, almost like she would have just known, right? But she didn't. So I called her a couple of weeks ago. I said, Nancy, you got a book coming. You're in it. And she was like, oh, great. Glad to hear it.
And she's not, she's as likable a character. I mean, she's not.
No, she doesn't really have anything to do.
Right. She has no lines, I don't think.
No.
Or very few.
Oh, she's got a couple of lines. And she's there. I mean, we see her. She delivers her, film. It was before digital. So it's, she's, having contact sheets developed, and she and Walter are looking at them together and deciding, what to send to the Times editor.
Was it at all nice to revisit this time in your life when editing a magazine was your thing?
Was it nice?
I don't know if that nice was kind of the worst.
Well, it was okay.
Adjective I could think of.
I think for me it was a huge time. There's no question about it, and I learned a lot, and I met wonderful friends who have remained friends to this very day. Some of whom are kind of echoed in here. Yeah, but it was significantly also incredibly important time in the Adirondacks. It was the beginning, we saw the first, that summer of red tides, I think it was 88, 87, I forget, of serious heat. We knew things were going very wrong environmentally at that point. We didn't know how bad, but we could see it coming, and we were all talking about it. Black Tuesday or Monday or whatever the hell it was happened, while I was there in the late 80s. AIDS was really changing people's behaviors. So, yes, we see how people behaved around romance and sexuality before the AIDS crisis and during, as time goes forward in the book. There are gay characters in here, as there were, of course, all over the Adirondacks and back then, and we didn't really talk much about, and that's much different today, I'm happy to say. In a lot of ways, I think the Adirondacks are in much better shape today than they were then, in terms of certain aspects of civilization, of just...
It was kind of the Wild East in a way in those days.
It was, and very simply in terms of good food, it was hard to get good food in the wintertime, we ate a lot of canned stuff and bulk stuff from all the little co-ops that got formed and stuff like that. So it was a time of change, and that's the kind of time and the kind of landscape that draws certain kind of dramatic possibilities around it. So was it a nice time for me? Well, it was a confusing time for me, but it was a very important time, and I learned a ton, and it made everything that's happened since then that's good for me possible.
Well, Chris Shaw, it's been a great ride, both talking with you and the book itself. Thank you so much.
I am so grateful, Mitch. Thank you.
Christopher Shaw is the author of the new novel, The Manager. He writes and lives in Bristol, Vermont. Our interview was recorded thanks to the good graces of the people in the media department at Middlebury College who let us use their studio. Thanks to them. Thanks to Ethan Shanty, who is in the studio with us right now. And Ethan, you're kind of a little too young to really remember a lot of the Cold War, right?
Yeah, that's in my rear view for sure. I mean, yeah, it's a thing that I learned about in school. But, I don't have any memory of that at all, except through the litany of 80s and 90s action movies that I've watched where, the Russians are always the bad guys. Yeah.
You're talking about Drago in, what was that,
Ivan
Rocky
Drago,
3?
Rocky 4.
Rocky 4, my bad, yes.
Yeah. How dare you?
You can tell I do not have the eye of the tiger.
It kind of surprises me that you don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of the Rocky movies. You seem like you would.
I know the first two pretty well, and it amazes me. There's a channel on Pluto TV that is all Rocky movies, and I think there are only 5 of them.
There's the original
Creed.
There's the original 5, and then there's Rocky Balboa, which is 6, and then there's now 3 Creed movies. Maybe there's 2. There's at least 2.
And then there's Creed Bratton.
Then there's Creed Bratton. So this novel doesn't really have James Bond style gadgets and high speed chases and stuff, right?
No, it's much more imagine yourself as a 1980s magazine editor who suddenly finds himself caught in international intrigue. Feel to it.
Okay.
Which is not unlike what it would be like if one of us in public radio in 2025 got ourselves caught in a situation involving international intrigue.
I think anything that happens with us is going to be much more along the lines of being John Malkovich than being James Bond. But I do want to know, what is your favorite spy movie gadget?
Ooh, my favorite spy movie
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great, because I was a huge James Bond movie fan growing up.
That doesn't surprise me.
But I'll go to Get Smart because I identify much more with Maxwell Smart than with James
Sure.
James Bond or James Brown, as I was about to say. And I will have to go with either his standard issue shoe phone.
Okay, right. Classic.
Or there was an episode of Get Smart where he had these things in the heels of his shoes that allowed him to levitate.
Oh, okay.
They were like little jet packs.
Okay,
but,
gotcha.
But in true Get Smart fashion, they were never quite perfected.
Of course. My favorite spy gadget is not from a movie at all. It is from an episode of The Simpsons where George Bush Sr. moves across the street from The Simpsons and starts up a feud with Homer. And there's a scene where Homer and George Bush are fighting, having a fist fight in the sewers. And George Bush says, "Here's a little trick they taught us in the CIA." And he takes the little winder from his watch and he extends it out, and there's a piece of wire in there, and then he chokes Homer with it. That's my favorite spy gadget.
I think there was actually an episode of Get Smart where there was a device just like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, Go Gadget closing credits.
Yeah. Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. To learn more about this show, listen to past conversations, and to support the program, visit ncpr.org/northwards. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.